Okay, it says that we're live. So hello everybody out in YouTube land. Hopefully you're seeing this. There was a delay last time, and last time we did this, I started too late. So when I watched the video, there was just like 20 seconds of me sitting there not saying anything. So at least I've filled the void, if nothing else at this time. It says that we're, oops, and that was the delay. So if you're out there watching us, thanks for joining us tonight. We are engaging in community conversation around age and ageism, and it's actually the last circle event of the year. So we're sad, but also very glad to have brought so many programs to you all this year. My name is George, them or they pronouns, and I'm the program coordinator at Circle. So I put on events and support events and other things around that. And I'd like to let Felipe introduce himself real quick as well on the Circle end.
Hi everyone, my name is Felipe Martinez. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the executive director for Circle. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Felipe. And we have three wonderful panelists today, and I'm wondering if each of you can just briefly introduce yourselves, whatever and however you'd like to do that. Megan, can we start with you?
Sure. Hi, y'all. Megan Coletta, pronouns are she and her, and I work in first year programs, doing some work with the FIG program, but also specifically helping to oversee the Community and Transfer Commons that exists in the hub, but has been remote for the past year, but hopefully excited to get back into the hub for this academic year.
Thanks. And then we'll go to Ian.
Hi everyone, my name is Ian Sherman. I'm a grad student at the UW College of Education, and I'm also an English instructor at Green River College, a community college in South King County.
Thanks, and Noé.
Hi everyone, my name is Noé Valdovinos, and I am an academic advisor at the Foster School of Business. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm happy to be here. So hope you all enjoy tonight, and good evening.
All right, thanks everybody. So for those of you watching, the way it'll work is we have some questions we'll ask our panelists, and at any time I'm going to throw a link in the chat here, and you can use that link to submit questions, and it's entirely anonymous. So you can just put a question or multiple questions in there, and then we will get to those as we have time. In the meantime, we'll start off with our questions for the panelists. The first of which is, what is your current view of age? And how is this view informed by your cultural background and or societal expectations?
Yeah, I can go ahead and get us started. So when I was thinking about this question, I was wondering, what is my view of age? And as I started to think more of it, I think it's a developmental transition into where people are in stages of life. For example, after high school graduation, typically we assume that a student is between the ages of 17 and 18. And then when they transition into college, then we have an assumption that they are between the ages of 18 to 21. So my interpretation of age is that it's a developmental process of the student and the person and where they are in life. I guess what shaped my perception of this culturally also would be my upbringing, and coming from a Mexican background, there is an expectation once you hit a certain age. So for example, if you are a male and you hit the age of say 15, 16, you are expected to start working already. And just continue that, because that has been something that has been an expectation for other males in that age range, and so on with marriage and other aspects of life. So that's how I view my interpretation of age and how that's been shaped through my family and cultural background.
I can go next. I think for me, especially as both both a grad student coming back into education after a lot of years away from it, and as a community college instructor. I work with folks of really, really diverse ages in my classroom. And in the past, I've actually had like mothers and daughters in the same English 101 class. And one of the things that I think, one of the ways that I really think about age is as cultural context. There are assumptions we make about where one should be and what one should be doing in various kind of like age identities. And if those categories get broken, it's, you know, in extreme examples, it can lead to discomfort or some sort of ostracism. But even in mild examples, and in the Pacific Northwest, we tend to be, you know, mild and welcoming about everything, but there can still be a lot of like internal discomfort around these cultural contexts that we assume folks are supposed to occupy at various points in their lives. And I think that discomfort, if not spoken about openly and loudly, can really affect students' views of themselves, can affect their ability to succeed, can affect their ability to move forward and complete as well. You know, especially if we make assumptions about who's here with us.
For this similar in no way, I started to think a lot about this. And then I think in true form, my assumptions and my expectations were challenged. That I actually started the day talking to 90 first grade students from New York about college. And I walked in with some assumptions of what their understanding would be and some expectations of how that would go and in true form. And I think this is where I had to like check my bias. Like they knew a lot more than I thought they would know. I think because that's a group of students I don't normally interact with. And so my interaction with undergraduate or graduate, you know, students, a lot of me for age is having multiple experiences where either I was maybe in the younger category with a lot of age-wise, just older people and people assuming and expecting me not to be able to meet expectations and trying to really work through the mutual respect of that in all the ways that that shows up. And I think for me, how my cultural background comes into this is that there is a very real, like, they're an adult, you respect them and you do not push back against them. Which I think from my background in both my undergraduate degree in psychology and my graduate degree, that has to be teased out a little bit because there's this psychology thought process around like when you realize your parents or guardians are human and that extreme cognitive or like confusion of like, I'm humanizing them, but that feels weird. They're supposed to be the authority and they're supposed to be always right. But then that gets quickly broken down. And so, yeah, always changing and thinking about it. But I think, again, it's just experiences that kind of push back on that like normalcy of what age is. And I was so happy that the first graders this morning completely broke all assumptions and expectations that I had. And they were magical to talk about college with this morning.
Thank you all for sharing and for sharing such a wide array of experiences and thoughts on that. Our next question, can you share a moment when you feel like your perceptions and or ideas around age changed meaningfully?
Yeah, so I have multiple examples, but I'll try to just share one. I think time when my perception of age changed is when I was growing up and in college, I had a perception of what being 30 was going to be like. Now that I'm there and in my mid 30s too, now I'm like, whoa, that is not what I thought. And now that you are in that stage, it's a developmental stage that you're in, which completely reshapes the way that you thought being a 30-year-old would be like. So I can't give any direct specific, but just thinking about a specific age range, and once I got there, how that was not the case, that was more a realization of perception of age is really up to interpretation, really, because that is always changing and it's never it's not something that stays stagnant. It's something that continues to develop. Even if you are a 30-year-old, within that whole year of being a 30-year-old, a lot of things change. And maybe your perception of that age also changed from the time that you turn 30 to the time that you're turning 31. So for me, that's when that meaning just changed. It's not what you think it is. And if it is, I don't know, you're doing something right or wrong. I have no idea. But I think that's a point in my life when I realized that age is really perception.
I'll go next. Looks like we got an order set now. So I think for me, it was two different times. After my sophomore year of college, I had a really rough time. I was struggling to do well. I was doing too much, and as a result, I was doing everything badly. And I ended up taking a year off after some therapy, and I was really worried that I was basically breaking a very set pattern that I thought was just the way that things were supposed to go. That, you know, after you completed high school, you went and you did college, and then after college, you went and did the grown-up things, you know. And I didn't have a lot of models around me of folks following different paths to that. But I found that, you know, when I came back, I was with a different age group. And then when I graduated, I realized that it didn't really matter that much. You know, the thing that matters the most now is trying to figure out when my reunion is for college. Am I with the group I started with or the group that I finished with? But that was a big one for me, seeing that the movement through in 4 years is pretty much an arbitrary kind of old pattern that doesn't actually matter that much. And that break really helped me recontextualize what age was.
For me, the experience that always comes to my head. So right after I graduated college, I moved up to Boston and started to work at a school of public health there. And in that school, that was kind of a graduate level school, similar to the School of Public Health here at UW, but there's mostly graduate programs. And I started working within a master's program that primarily was serving students that were full medical doctorates. Like they'd had doctorates for a long time. They were working towards a master's of public administration. So they wanted a higher up administration role within the hospitals or medical systems that they worked with. And so I was very excited to start that role. And so me walking in as this, what was perceived to be a naive 22-year-old supporting these 50-something, very accomplished, top of their, you know, their field doctors, there was this epic battle between, no, we're gonna have some mutual respect here. Like, I have things that I can show you, and I'm not going to shame or make you feel bad if you don't know how to do this, but also I deserve the mutual respect of, like, I can support you in these small ways to make your educational space really substantial. And the smallest way, which is still one of my proudest moments, is because of how high up in their fields they were, all of the different ways that they've done presentations, mostly through conferences, someone catered to them, and they would take their presentation, load it for them, and then they never had to touch it. So none of them knew how to load up a presentation. And I was told, well, you have to do that for them. And I said, if they can do brain surgery, I think we can support them learning how to load a PowerPoint. And so slowly but surely, I was really clear with them of, like, this is a small, soft skill that technology-wise, you're going to have to learn. And so I said, I will stand here and I will talk you through it, but you're going to do it. And I'll never forget when I walked into one of the classes that a day, waiting for them to kind of rush me to start it. And I said, does anyone need help? And they said, no, you may go away. And I said, okay, thank you very much. And I left, because there was that mutual respect of, like, there are some skills I can teach you, but also you have other things too. So I think it's that perception of, like, everyone comes with some incredible knowledge, and knowing that your age doesn't matter what sort of knowledge you're bringing, because I taught 50 doctors that do some incredible surgeries to load PowerPoints. And I can say that forever, which seems so small, but, like, they really valued the fact that I didn't shame them for their lack of technology understanding. I said, let's figure it out together, which was really cool.
Thank you all for that. And I do want to say, if anyone wants to break the cycle or the order, please feel free. I don't want you to feel like we have to go on that. So next, I'm wondering, in college settings, and many of you have spoken to this already, but in college settings, a large majority of students are between a certain age, usually 18 to 24. And so how do you think that influences our perception of what a college student looks like?
I think that in thinking about this question, I also think about myself, because I started as a traditional age student and I completed as an adult student. So our perception of what we think when we think of 18 through 24, it's very narrow into thinking if you're within this age range, you must be involved in fraternity and sorority life or student involvement, other activities. You might be interested in, I don't know, service community of some sort, living in the residence halls. And when we think that way, we're also eliminating the experiences of other students that don't fit that category, or even if they are within that age range, say within the age of 22, 23, we might be ignoring the fact that they may be a student parent or may have a full-time job. So thinking about the age range of 18 through 24 as a student, and if we have a perception that because of their age in college, they must fall within this category, we're actually thinking and might be doing a disservice to students that may not fit that criteria, even if they do fall within the age of 22, 23, 24. And I also think of underrepresented students or first-gen students or historically marginalized students who have a completely different experience, even if they are an 18-year-old coming into college. So that is very, very different. So the way that I think that our vision is perceived for students between 18 and 24, I feel that in a way, when we narrow that, we're also thinking from a place of privilege, because not everyone has that same experience.
I think what you said, Noe, made me think too about this is the value of like which experiences are the correct college experiences. Like I know for us in first year programs, one thing we've tried to do is just broaden like what experiences make you ready for some of our roles, which like that part of it is noting like if they are a non-traditional age student, like Noe, you said if they're a mom, like I know if you are a mom that runs a Girl Scout troop, you have some skills to make that happen. Or if you're a commuting student that you don't have a lot of on-campus roles because you are consistently commuting, but maybe you are a manager in a retail store. Again, those are some very good skills to be able to like function within those spaces. And so I think too, it's like major processes or RSO processes, like what are being valued as experiences that are correct that make you eligible for these roles? Because I think that's inherently biased with if you're not in, like Noe said, like fraternity sorority, or you don't have RSO experience, those shouldn't be valued over other experiences, which I think is something we have to break, especially when it comes to students of non-traditional age or just non-traditional involvement, really.
I know, and Megan, you both broaden this out to like students that historically underserved students, first-gen students who haven't had the same like cultural connections to like how to college, and I think that's really crucial. Like because one of the things that I think about when I think about a traditional college-age student, and let's flesh that out by saying like a white middle-class traditional age college student, is there's this whole like there's this idea of a hidden curriculum that student has had more access to, and a lot of times instructors just kind of assume a certain amount of shared information about what it means to be a university student, what it means to move through a class, and so students who are very, very capable can often end up struggling or doing poorly just because they don't know they don't have the same kind of like social capital around being a university student, you know. And a lot of older students, folks come back to higher ed for a variety of reasons, and sometimes it's because they had a horrible experience the first time through, and then they went and they lived a life, and they decided to come back and give it a second go. And that can hang on with folks in a lot of like in a lot of really, really powerful ways that we don't know just by like seeing somebody. The other thing I want to say about kind of the assumptions that we make about a traditional college age students. I used to teach at Olympic College, which is over in Bremerton. It has a really big veteran and active military population. So these were folks who were coming back to education after service. And then I went over to Green River, and I was working with a lot of traditional college age and running start students. And one of the things that I noticed right away is that a lot of students of more traditional college age, beyond kind of knowing kind of how to school, they'd also developed some defenses to keep themselves from really having to show up fully in the classroom. And they felt really sandboxed in that they would perform to what they thought the instructor wanted from them, and they would keep the rest of their identities and their thoughts and their beliefs kind of safe from education. Whereas a lot of older students would feel free to call things out and say, I think that's wrong. Like, I don't like that. I don't agree with it, and would challenge with kind of like a fuller self. And that's an interesting aspect of this too. So not only like having access to those patterns of what it means to successfully complete education, but also subconsciously doing the work to not fully be there, because they know that education that sometimes education doesn't do the best job of showing up for all of them, for all of their aspects of themselves.
And Ian, I want to add to something that you mentioned as well, in terms of if adult students are in the classroom, they will typically ask more questions or be more assertive in some aspects of the classroom, whereas other students who are just coming in from high school may not. And when you mentioned that, I was also thinking about the international student population, because not just that, but also culturally, it varies depending on what their background is and if they are going to question the professor or even ask questions, because in some cultures, it's disrespectful to question the professor or to ask a question. And in some other cultures, it's more encouraged to do so because it's part of the learning process. So all of those factors just came to mind when you were talking about the difference in students' age and the kind of actions that some take versus some others. And yeah, I just wanted to add that to what you said.
Or if I could add something good, with the graduate students, for example, we also see, well, as an instructor, I see the difference when students have work experience, and then students that came through, college and then enrolled. And it goes back to what Megan was saying in terms of like how when a student has work experience and they're able to connect that into the classroom and what they're learning, it kind of like resonates more. They're a little more active, and then they kind of like as an instructor, I enjoy it when there's that pushback at that conversation, because we're able to really drill down into the concepts. Whereas if it's just okay, you stand in front of a classroom, you say whatever you need to say for the lesson, and then there's no engagement. It's more like, it goes back to what Ian was saying, it's more performative, right? It's like, okay, you just tell me what you need me to do to be able to get the grade, to be able to move into the next class. So it kind of like reflecting on what everyone's saying, it almost feels like our educational system here in the US, sometimes it could do a disservice to a student, because we're like, okay, you're 18, you're supposed to go to college, as opposed to like, hey, there's nothing wrong with taking a break, figuring out what you want to do, and then go back and do, whether it be trade school, a professional degree, or go to college and then do what you figure out what you wanted to do.
I think, Felipe, what made me think of is a phrase I talk a lot with our students about is like unlearning learning, of clearly identifying like what learning strategies, or in the big word like pedagogy, like all research says does not actually equate to good learning. Like lecture style learning is actually one of the worst ways to go about learning in many cases. But I think what we identified is like for some traditional college age students, sometimes that is they get into a really good course where like an instructor helps them kind of unlearn and feel comfortable doing that. But sometimes it's outside of that space that they're probably not noticing they're unlearning that structure. And they think like, oh, this isn't a work environment. But then like everyone was saying, just like then in the classroom space, they feel more confident doing that. Because as Felipe said, like they have the world or like real work experience, which again, that's kind of a crappy phrase anyways. But I think that's something that I know we talk about a lot. And it's also just like clearly identifying those small little things that students don't even notice of like, that is something that was trained into you. And it is not easy to untrain. Because I think you're absolutely right, Felipe. K through 12 education, and specifically in America, it doesn't train students well for college. And then they hit college at any point and they're like, this is not the same education I thought I was supposed to be getting. I don't know how to do this. I was just told to do standardized tests. And now you want me to critically think? Like, I haven't been asked to do that yet. Okay, let's try that. So all the big ways that shows up is so fascinating.
Such great thoughts. I appreciate how much we dived into the learning in classroom settings. So along the same line of thinking, I'm wondering how you think that this sort of stereotypical age influences our perceptions around the services that we provide at the college level.
I think so. I used to recruit transfer students for UW. Now I'm at the Foster School, so I do advising. And when I was recruiting transfer students, I was recruiting the non-traditional student population from community colleges in the state, here in the west part of the state and Eastern Washington. Experiences are very different for both of those populations. But as I was recruiting for transfer students, I also found of resources that we do have at UW that do accommodate the non-traditional age student. Maybe not as much as the traditional age student, but we do have those resources. And sometimes the student does not know about them. For example, we have the transfer commuter commons for transfer students. I don't know if every transfer student knows about that. We also have the Veteran Student Center. I would hope that every veteran student knows that we have that center at the hub. But it's not to the extent that we need to have in terms of services for the non-traditional student. Because you're right, George, when we think about students that are within the traditional age range, we can think of so many resources that are available to them. So many, from housing to dining to involvement to academic to whatever the case may be. But for some reason, whether we have them or not for the other student population, there's a disconnect between do they know about the resources or do they not? And I'll take residence life, for example. There are residence halls for non-traditional age students, but if you don't know to ask if the resources are there, you probably won't find out unless you do your own research, and not everyone might know to start there as well. So I always go back to the reference that you don't know what you don't know. So if you don't know, how do you know to ask in the first place? And that's where advocacy comes into place. And I think that also determines the type of resources that we have and the type of resources that we make available for students. And unless that, bridge is crossed, we won't know what is needed.
Noe, on the subject of the Veterans Office, I know Sam Powers at UW because she used to work at Olympic, and so I knew her when she was heading up the Veterans Office over there. And one of the things that I think that she did really, really well was to make sure that she was doing more than offering services, but creating a community space. And I saw it both at UW and I saw it at Olympic. I would just see folks like hanging out, you know, and it was a place where folks felt welcome, felt safe. They knew they didn't have to like have an appointment to be there. They could just kind of like show up and hang out. And that was one of the spaces where that was actually one of the very few spaces where I saw students of a non-traditional age lingering on campus in any way beyond, you know, like beyond the time that their class was finished. And you know, the vet population is a very specific population, and there's already a lot of shared experience there that can lead to community formation, I think, more quickly and more easily. But I think it's a model that we can think through, you know, because like there's something really powerful about creating, you know, like the idea of third space, like, you know, creating the third space where folks want to be, creating the community space that where folks just naturally find themselves kind of like congregating toward. And I think it's a really effective service model too. I think a lot of, you know, I'm painting with a broad brush. A lot of non-traditional students might be averse to go out and seek out services on their own, through a lack of knowledge about them, through a feeling that there's like, that they don't want to mark themselves as somehow a deficit or needing help or needing assistance. And I think a lot, you know, and so it becomes a challenge then to get services out to folks to kind of meet them where they are. But that community model is, I think, a really effective way to do it.
A couple of things came to my head, specifically around like hours of operations for things. So I think of non-traditional age students that I think in terms of just services of what is being offered off the 8 to 5 schedule. And also I think of the ways that students interact with each other. Of like, I know so many RSO meetings that happen at 9 o'clock at night. And my hope after this year is that like, if you are a non-traditional age student, you're in an RSO, like you're given the opportunity to engage in that RSO from your home remotely while people meet on campus. So you're not told like, hey, you can't be in this RSO because you cannot be on campus until 9 o'clock at night. Same thing with like group projects. I think of so many students that might engage in group projects that they're told, well, this is how we always do it. It's like, no, there's adjustments that you can make, and they're not bad adjustments too. Like, is it bad if we all just go back to our home space and meet on Zoom in a group project for group projects? Like, to me, that's easier too. Like, group projects done, cool, laptop down, go to bed. I don't have to commute back to whatever space I need to go to. And I think what you said, Ian, about creating those community spaces where, I mean, even just the services just exist around, because I think of UW is humongous, and we know that there's, for any student, that culture of like, I am bounced between offices. Like, I hit here, they tell me not us, go here, not us, go here, not us, go here. And any student would say, I'm done. Like, that's, I can't, no one's helping me, everyone's bouncing me. So I think of spaces that, like, I'm honestly going to talk about the community transfer commons, where we know those, we'd heard from the students in that community transfer commons, like, we want to engage in things like CLU tutoring. But CLU tutoring was designed in a traditional model where it's really fun if you get to go to Mary Gates Hall from like 6 to 11 at night, but we're not going to be on campus for that. And so CLU was amazing. And they said, great, let's have tutors sit in the CTC, pull your students, find out what subjects they need, and we can hang out in the CTC during these hours that we know, like, we literally like, what hours do you want them? What subjects do you want? And that was something that, again, they weren't having to go search for it. It was already in their community space, which we heard from students helped, because they knew they could just hang out there, use the microwave, use the fridge and chill there, but like get the service that they needed. And so I think that's where it's slight adjustments, but they're not really adjustments. It's just making the services better and more accessible to all students too.
Yeah. And then Megan, on that too, how do we, when we look at how courses are scheduled, right? It's typically 8 to 5. And then so how do we, I mean, granted, it's an ambitious goal because, it's also the structure availability, but also student demand, but maybe rethinking how some courses are offered to make it more accessible for students. So I'm interjecting really quick because we have a question that's kind of like touching, Megan, to what you just mentioned, and something that you actually mentioned before about unlearning while we learn, right? So the question is, how do we unlearn while we learn before coming to college? So, I mean, I know it's very broad, but it's just like, what are some of the strategies? And Ian, maybe you could jump into, as an instructor, what are some of the things that you encourage students to do to kind of like unlearning or questioning some of the things that they know to be more successful in college?
I think one of the quickest and probably most easy ways to start, honestly, is noting your reactions to how you are asked to learn. So if you are forever challenged by sitting in a long lecture, which I know after many years of education, I still cannot sit in a long lecture. It's not my forte. But that became really clear to me really fast. So I started to think about, okay, if I can't sit in a long lecture, I know that for my own learning, like I'm a kinetic learner, sitting for a long period of time is very difficult for me. And so how I'm going to support that is I'm going to have a physical notepad. I'm not going to bring my laptop where I will dip into 6,000 tabs. I'm going to bring a physical notebook and I'm going to take physical notes. And so like I said, I think the simplest way is noting your reactions to the learning that you're asked to do. And if you know it's not helping you learn, start to Google, start to make small adjustments that can support that gap in the way that you're not learning as effectively. So that would be my initial thought. But as you saw my visual reaction, like it's a big question. It's a great question, but it's not simple. And I think it's lifelong of trying to assess like how you exist best in learning spaces. But Ian, as an instructor, I don't know if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, my first quarter at Green River, when I was teaching a class that was mostly college age students and running start students, I got really frustrated one day, and I had kind of like a joke meltdown where I asked the students to start challenging me and telling me I was wrong. And the students thought it was hilarious and had no idea what to do with that request. And I say that request with a grain of salt because I think that students are in a really deep hegemony that doesn't really get questioned, which is between student and instructor, And so like the easy answer is like, well, push back on your instructor and ask why they're doing that. And that's not really going to be great advice always, and it's easy for me to say because I would be amenable to that. But it's not going to work in every situation. I think Megan, I love that you mentioned kind of like just being aware of how you learn best and the situations and contexts that make learning really successful. And with that, you can also ask, like, you just be curious in your classes, like, why are we doing it like this? Like, why are we being asked to do that? What's the goal of this? And what that does is it starts to move you ever so gradually from a very passive learner perspective to a more active one, where you're thinking through not only like, what am I being asked to do, but why? And what am I supposed to get out of it? And I think the most powerful thing that a student can do to unlearn learning is to try to take control back of what they're learning. And even if, again, like with acknowledging like the power relationship that's there that they probably can't step out of, a student can decide like, okay, I see that the outcomes for this class are this, and this. This is what really matters to me. And so I'm really going to hit this one hard. And I'm going to make this class all about this for me. And I'm going to set my own personal goals for this class, the things that I care about. And I don't really know if they're what the instructor cares about or not, but this is how I'm going to measure my own success. And so like as instructors, we write up our own outcomes, but like you know, students, as students, we have the right to also do that and say like, this is what I really want out of here. And I think that that's one way to do it. And you know, you can feel out your instructor. And I personally think if I had a student that came to me and said like, this is my goal, this is what I really cared about, I'd be so lit up. I'd be so excited by that. And a lot of instructors really, really would as well.
And if I can add on to that as well, I think part of the learning and unlearning also comes with being open to learning something that you may not know or are comfortable in not knowing. And that's part of the learning and relearning, and also being okay with knowing that you are not going to know it all, and being okay with being corrected. And that's how you're going to be open to learning new ways of doing things, whether it's academically or socially or personally. That would be what I would think of the process being for learning and unlearning, just being open and being okay with not knowing.
And trying new things, right? Thank you.
I feel so much of that. So many of the things that you all were saying just like reminded me of my undergraduate experience as a older returning to school transfer student. Megan, the CTC clue tutoring at the CTC saved me for my my first year of college. I feel like it was great. So yeah, it's a wonderful resource, and thanks for talking about some of those services. The last question that we have is kind of like really broad, but I mean, what guidance or advice would you have for students who we would say don't fall within that sort of traditional age? And from what you've all said, you know, those students that many of you have served and worked with. Noe, if you're talking, you're muted right now.
I am, yeah. I pulled a rookie Zoomer here, so yeah. So I think I do reflect on my current role with the students that I advise, because I think about the mother who's doing full-time school and full-time work, and I also think about DACA students that I work with that don't fall within that traditional spectrum that we think of the college age students. So my advice for students who don't fit that category of traditionally aged or traditional path would be to not compare yourself to other students, because your journey is entirely different than your friend's journey or your classmates' journey. And you should not compare to where they're at in life, or how many credits they already have, or if they have already been admitted to their major and you haven't, or if you're falling behind on 2 or 3 courses, or if they're doing a dual degree and you're not. Your journey is your journey, and you need to go at your pace to what feels good and right to you. Because at the end of the day, you are the only one that you need to meet your goals with. And you are the only one that you need to consult with to figure out if you are on the right path for your personal goals. Yes, seek advising, seek mentorship, but at the end of the day, you are the only one that needs to be fulfilled with your personal habits and your personal ambitions and your personal goals. Because as long as you keep on comparing yourself, you will never meet that benchmark of where others are, because their journey is not yours. And just, you know, follow your own path. And that would be my advice. And I see it a lot with students that feel that they are falling behind. They're not. As I mentioned before, I started as a traditionally aged student right after high school. I graduated with my undergraduate at the age of 24, so already considered an adult student. Took me a long time. So did I compare myself to other students? Yes, absolutely. was that a good thing to do? Absolutely not, because that's, my journey. And if I continue to think that way, then I'm just holding myself back from my own progression and not really focusing on my steps forward and where I want to go. So that would be my advice. Focus on yourself without comparing yourself to others.
I want to, Noah, you mentioned in your last question, kind of like the making sure that you're open to learning new things, to not knowing. And I think my advice is similar, which is like, feel free to not know. I know that I personally am both incredibly stubborn and way too hard on myself. And even in my own experiences as an adult learner coming into grad school after working, I have stubbornly refused help, assistance, or information because I thought I just need to do this on my own now. I'm a grown up now, I should, others did this before me. I should just be able to do it on my own. I should just figure it out by myself. And I've often cost myself time and money in doing so. And this also dovetails to the advice that you just gave, which is, had I been freer to acknowledge that I don't know, that I could use the help, that the help is there so that I can focus on the stuff that really matters, I would have been more successful at various points in that path. And so I think that that's my advice, is like, don't try to do everything on your own. You don't have to, like, don't assume you should know. Why should you? And don't avoid services that are there that you're already paying for as part of your tuition. It's not that those services are free, it's that those services are prepaid. They're part of the package. So take advantage of the things that you're putting your money toward.
I think unintentionally, my advice is like a combination of both what Noah and Ian said. Find those people on campus that view you as a whole human. You're not just a student, you are a student, and you come with intense levels of complexity that if you can find someone that can hold you accountable to like seeking help, like Anne gave some good examples of, like, I wasn't comfortable seeking help, but like find those people that are gonna be like, hey, I know you need to seek help. Let's talk about how you can do that. Like, I'm not going to force you into it, but like, let's talk about it. Because if you're seeking it and it's not working, like, we got to change up some strategies here. And the same thing with what Noah was saying, like knowing that you need someone to help you not compare to others. So like, I'm falling behind in classes. You never want that person to say like, well, yeah, because every other student could keep up. No, you have other things going on. There's other things impacting your ability to keep up with students. And that's okay too, because you are a whole human. Student is a piece of that. And so I think that would be my advice, is find those people that can help that too. Because I think a lot of what both Noe and Ian said is something that is coming to my head. It's hard as a non-traditional student to just exist on college campuses. They were not built for non-traditional age students. All college campuses were built for white, rich men. Like there's a lot of complexities to that, but I think it's knowing that you can't do it alone, which is exactly what Noe and Ann said. So like find those humans and those people on campuses, faculty, staff, instructors, literally anyone who can help you in the ways that you need it, but also, be your champion of like, you are doing great, regardless of how you might be comparing yourself to others. You are doing an incredible job for you. And that's all that matters. Like your journey is yours. Don't compare. But again, you might need someone to like be that mirror to that, because that's not always easy.
And Megan, I was also, when I was listening to you, I was thinking about what you're saying, and I thought about the reference that I would hear my previous supervisor say, which is find your cheerleaders, because they're going to be rooting for you to finish, to graduate, and they're going to support you along the way. So just like you said, find those people that are going to support you, if you are a non-traditional student, find those non-traditional staff members that are going to be rooting for you. If you are a first generation underserved, underrepresented student, find a staff or faculty that could identify and had that similar experience. Find people on campus that are going to be your biggest cheerleaders, because we are here, first gen here. So find the people that are going to help you get to where you want to be. You can't do it alone. And that is something that Ian referenced to, where you've got to ask for help. How else are you going to get from step 1 to step 2 and step 3 and beyond? And that's just adding to my advice of what I would say to non-traditional or students in general. Find your biggest cheerleaders, because we're here.
And then what I usually tell students is like, whether you come ask a question or not, I'm still gonna get paid. So make me earn my paycheck, right? And that's, goes back to what Ian said. I love that, like the services are prepaid. I'm gonna have to steal that one, Ian. That was good. But going back to what everyone's talking about, just to add a little comment, and it ties into the question that we had about how do we unlearn what we learn, right? So it's like the question of student success and what we define as a successful student, right? Does it have to be someone with a 3.9 or a 4.0 GPA, or someone with a 2.2? And then, for that particular student that got a 2.2, it would have been, it could have been incredibly hard, but they're proud of getting that 2.2, right? So it's like they're equally successful as someone, that got that 4.0. And then as an institution or as an enterprise of higher education, we need to celebrate both, right? So I think that's the unlearning that we have to do as an institution, is that what does it mean when a student, how do we define a student that's successful?
It's one thing, Felipe, on that point, it's one thing that I think a lot of students who are coming back to college know, and then but get worried about when they come back. Like they know that the GPA doesn't really matter once they're out, and the only people who talk about their GPA a few years outside of college are usually horrible people. That like get something else to talk about besides what your GPA was in college. But it's hard to remember that when you're back in it, because it's because basically for a very brief period, a GPA is something that can be exchanged for goods. So there's a GPA capital, but it loses its value precipitously after graduation, and then it just doesn't matter. So, use it to get the good things, get enough of it to get the things that you want, get enough of it to exchange it for what you care about. But don't give in to the GPA economy, because it's going to crash quickly after you're done, and it won't matter at all,
Well, and I think even too, I'm thinking about your point, about like identifying what you want out of the learning spaces. Because I know for me, that was something that I had to kind of unlearn and relearn for my graduate degree, is I am not a great student. People ask me that all the time. They're like, you must have been a great student. I'm like, nope, not at all. Left undergrad with pretty abysmal GPA. I'm not sure how my graduate program accepted me, but I knew walking into that space, I had an instructor that kind of did that work with me, and of like, you don't care about your GPA. And I'm like, no, I know what I need to pass this program and get this degree, and that's what I'm going to do. But it was knowing what I wanted to get out of it and identifying that ahead of time so that I could pass the class, but I also knew the skills and the experiences I would get out of those courses that influence my work now. And again, I think you put it so perfectly of like a GPA capital, that like sometimes that's not always the easiest answer, which we all know it's not always that simple, but knowing what you want out of those experiences, I think can be super impactful. And honestly, like it was really fun as a graduate student to release myself of like, I praise my friends that got 4.0s, and they're like, what'd you get? I'm like, not that, but I know how I learned. And so I think that's something, again, it's an unlearning, and it took time, but yeah, I was just thinking about that too.
One more quick bit I wanted to talk about, Megan, on that thought regarding GPA. So I was no shade to any department whatsoever, but I was when I first my first graduate degree was an MFA at UW's English department. It was a great program. I really loved it. And at the time, there was a strange thing about GPAs. Like the range kind of shrunk, and the range was really like 3.7 to 4.0. And I never knew if that was like an actual practice. Like the idea was, well, you're a graduate student, you're supposed to be doing really good work, and so you should only get a grade in this range. But as a result, when folks got a 3.7, they felt like they got a D. And it, like the whole system was just kind of like thrown back up in the air, and folks didn't really know what the standards were anymore. And I saw that, and I was like, well, I don't care about this system, because it's obviously, there's obviously something weird about it, and I don't want to invest any of my self image in it. Now, I had the luxury of doing that, because it didn't matter very much what my GPA was coming out of it, but it just so clearly illustrated, I think, Megan, the point you're making, which is like you got the GPA you needed to get the stuff, and that's what really matters. Like, did you get what you needed to get the stuff? And if you did, like, check. And that's all it's really for,
And then now, if for, let's say, a student is watching and they think about, well, what about graduate school, right? Don't I need to get a high GPA to do that? But now, even for graduate student applications, a lot of schools offer a space independent from the personal statement for students to talk about their transcript if they feel the need to talk about it, right? So even in the post-secondary arena, we're starting to see that some students may want to address whatever they feel they need to address in the transcript as an opportunity to say, hey, don't let this piece of paper judge my potential as a student. And I think that's very commendable, because it gets to a lot of the things that we're talking about. It's like, hey, it's like, I still learn, I still reach my potential as a student. It just went through the motions to get what I needed to get to essentially get that degree. But that doesn't necessarily measure my potential as a scholar in this particular program. So just put it all in there.
Yeah, thank you for that, Felipe. I think that's definitely how my transitioning from finishing my undergrad into being a master's student who's also planning to be a PhD student in the future, my own perceptions around GPA have shifted a lot, and I think they have shifted more to that. This is a thing for me to get this other thing that I want in the future. But that recognition has been really interesting. And I think the thing I'm taking away from tonight is that cheerleader aspect. I really like that, finding folks that will support you, and for those of you watching, reminding you that if you need it, there are places at the UW to support you. And if there are things you need the UW doesn't have, also tell people, because there's new stuff starting all the time, right? Circle, Felipe, that started what, year and a half ago about? So there's always room for more things. The UW is huge. So for all of you watching, I do want to remind you, this is the last Circle program of the year. So if you've engaged with us for the first time, welcome. And if it's one of many, thanks for your continued support. In the YouTube chat, I'm putting the link to sign up for our Discord. It's super quick. It's basically just, do you have a UW Net ID? What is it? Great, you're in. So there's that for you. And then we won't be having a whole lot of programs over the summer, but do just keep checking in on our calendar at that link there, and you can see what we'll have in the future. But Felipe, correct me if I'm wrong, programs will pick up more closer to fall quarter. Thank you to all of our panelists. This has been a really great conversation, and I'm so happy to have heard so much from each of you in so many really enriching and vastly different but also similar ways. So thanks so much for being here. For all of you in streaming land, thanks for joining us. And if you chimed in for only a part of this, it will likely be on the YouTube later, so you can come back and visit it. Thanks, everyone.